Good afternoon, everyone. Thank you so much for joining our webinar. And we look forward to our discussion today about powering up an inclusive clean energy workforce. I'm going to get started with just a few quick notes of housekeeping. First of all, please keep your lines on mute if you're not presenting so that we can avoid background noise. Secondly, we are recording this webinar, and we will be distributing the recording to all of the registrants afterward, along with a copy of the slide deck. At any point during the call, you can scroll up to the top of your screen and click on the chat button and type a question to the host. We will be going over all of the questions at the end of the webinar, and we'll try to get to as many of those as possible. We're aiming to reserve the last 15 minutes of the call for those who want to stay on for questions. Powering Forward is a joint effort by the Clean Energy Business Network and Business Council for Sustainable Energy. It is an ongoing webinar series examining the unique impacts facing clean energy industries during the COVID-19 epidemic, along with the vital role of our sectors in our future economic recovery. We're very delighted to be partnering on this particular episode with Third Way, and we'll be hearing from one of our presenters who will be representing Third Way on this conversation. We really also appreciate the support of our series sponsors, Citizens for Responsible Energy Solutions Forum, which is supporting this series in the lead up to National Clean Energy Week, September 21st through 25th, along with Natixis Investment Managers, which is the first offerer of target date environmental, social, and governance screened mutual funds and retirement plans. Today, we are joined by a very exciting panel of speakers. Lisa Jacobson, who is the president of the Business Council for Sustainable Energy, will be co-moderating this discussion with me, Lynn Abramson, the president of the Clean Energy Business Network. And our first panelist will be Ellen Hughes-Cromwell, who is senior resident fellow at Third Way and also previously served as a chief economist at the Department of Commerce. We also are going to be joined by Timothy Allen Simon, who is a former commissioner of the California Public Utilities Commission and who currently runs his own consulting firm, as well as Sean Garrison, who's director of congressional affairs of the Solar Energy Industries Association. And then finally, we're going to hear some research conducted by Camille Moore, who was the 2020 Jan Shiori Fellow for the Business Council for Sustainable Energy over this summer. So with that introduction, I want to turn it over to Lisa to tell you a little bit more about the Business Council for Sustainable Energy.
Thank you, Lynn. And yes, the Business Council for Sustainable Energy is very pleased to be partnering on this Powering Forward webinar series with Clean Energy Business Network, as well as our series sponsors and our partners on today's conversation. The Business Council for Sustainable Energy is a trade association. We are based in Washington, D.C., and we focus on promoting policies that will expand and affordably deploy a broad range of clean energy technologies with an emphasis on commercially available technologies in the energy efficiency, natural gas, and renewable energy sectors. You could go to the next slide, please. Our membership is very broad-based, spanning manufacturers, utilities, public power, project developers, trade associations, and energy and environmental market service providers. Go to the next slide. So, we will be looking forward to doing additional Powering Forward webinars with Clean Energy Business Network, and I will let Lynn give a little background on CEBN.
Terrific. So the Clean Energy Business Network is an independent small business subsidiary of the Business Council for Sustainable Energy, and we partner very closely on a lot of our policy and education work, but really tailor our resources to the unique needs of small businesses across the country. We serve as the small business voice for the clean energy economy and work to enhance opportunities for clean energy technology and service providers in 3 areas. The first being policy support, along with market and technology education, and finally, business development assistance. And we have, we're now up to about 4,400 members across all 50 states, representing a very diverse spectrum of technologies. We've been very happy to partner with the Business Council on this Powering Forward webinar series and looking to offer support to businesses that have been impacted by the COVID-19 epidemic. Additionally, Business Council, I will let Lisa just briefly mention the Resilience and Reliability Dialogue and Hill briefings that they've been conducting.
Thanks, Lynn. Yes, as part of a board initiative that was started 3 years ago, the Business Council for Sustainable Energy launched a Resilience and Reliability Dialogue. It featured a thought leaders series, which I think of the Powering Forward webinar series as an outgrowth of. We invited over 30 different key think tanks, individual thought leaders, and other partners to speak with the BCSC mentorship about resilience and reliability issues and how the energy sector played a role. And we also had spent similarly a good amount of time working at the federal level to help shape new initiatives to enable more leveraged investment in resilience projects and resilient infrastructure. So in addition to having the ability to learn and progress in our own coalitions thinking on resilience and reliability, we were active with advocacy. And that advocacy continues now with a special series that we're doing aimed at congressional staff on resilience and resilience policy.
Terrific. And before we kick it over to our guest speakers, I just wanted to highlight a few of our some announcements that I think would be of interest to some of the clean energy businesses and entrepreneurs that are on this conversation. First, just want to flag that the American Made Challenges program, which is a DOE program offering grant support and also access to technical resources to help scale technologies very rapidly, has a number of upcoming deadlines. So I just wanted to point those out. We have links to these provided here, and we'll circulate those with a slide deck. I also mentioned earlier National Clean Energy Week, which is coming up the week of September 21st, and we have a terrific lineup of guest speakers that will be joining from Capitol Hill and industry. So please register and tune into that. We have a sign-on letter we've been circulating to urge lawmakers to support clean energy in an economic recovery package. And finally, in light of COVID-19, we've opened the CEBN funding database, which is a repository of various government, private sector, and incubator opportunities up to the public for free to help support businesses during this time. So with that, I just want to briefly set the stage for the genesis of this conversation. And as unfortunately, I think many of the companies that are on this call are well too aware, we have seen a tremendous impact of COVID-19 on the clean energy industry. Research that's been ongoing by DW Research has shown that we've lost about 500,000 jobs in our industry so far since March. We have seen some recovery, but unfortunately, still the vast majority of those who lost their jobs from this industry still remain unemployed. And, moving ahead, we think it's very critical to support the clean energy industry in economic recovery. Before this crisis, we represented the growth sectors of the U.S. energy economy and actually supported some of the fastest growing jobs. So we believe that once we do begin to reopen communities, the clean energy industry offers a tremendous opportunity to put people back to work, but also do so in a way that builds long-term resilience and healthier and cleaner communities. So what we would like to examine with our panelists today are, first, what are some of the specific impacts we are seeing of COVID-19 on the industry? Second, what are some of the policies that could help get people back to work when it's safe to do so? And third, how do we make sure that as we return communities to work, we do so with an eye towards equity and inclusiveness, and we address some of the long-standing lack of diversity in our industry, as well as putting communities that have been particularly and disproportionately impacted by this crisis to work. So with that, I would like to start by introducing Ellen Hughes-Kromick, who is going to be our first speaker and will be telling us a little bit about some polling results that Third Way conducted, and actually many of our members participated in, that will give us a greater insight as far as some of the impacts of COVID-19 on our industry. So over to you.
Great. Thank you very much, Lynn, and welcome everyone to this really fascinating webinar. Really appreciate the opportunity to participate. At the outset, I would like to thank my colleagues at Third Way who have been partners as we undertook the survey of clean energy businesses. That would include Ryan Fitzpatrick, John Milko, and Andres Prieto. Thank you so much to all of them who were the collaborators on this survey project. And I would like to include in that thanks two statisticians who advised us, Rick Rosen and Rick Clayton, both of whom worked at the Department of Labor during their professional career and actually worked on clean energy jobs. With that, Lynn, let's go to the first slide, please. We were very interested in trying to understand what the impacts were and continue to be on the clean energy industry as a result of COVID. Like CEBN, we were concerned about this impact and wanted to find some new ways to measure it. We canvassed across all different types of clean energy sectors, not just in renewables or not specifically in battery storage, but across all sectors. And while we know that last year over 3 million workers were in the clean energy industry, BW Research and their efforts in 2020 have been able to really help to measure what the job losses have been, and we absolutely thank them for it. What we did in our survey was actually develop a very short set of questions that gave us some qualitative insights about the impacts, as well as some measures of the use of federal assistance. Next slide, please. Some of the key findings may not surprise those of you on the call, but were quite interesting and a bit worrisome in terms of the impacts. We found that the Paycheck Protection Program that was launched as part of the CARES Act was quite successful. Half of the respondents to our survey took advantage of that program. There are dark clouds ahead because that program, as you know, has run out, and 46% of respondents said they would have to lay off workers, lower wages, or cut worker hours, and even cease operations if they did not get additional assistance. 2/3 of the businesses said that their customers have either delayed or postponed orders, and the industry needs federal government to take additional action with a combination of supportive policies. Next slide. This slide shows the percent of respondents that were active in the clean energy business sectors that we were trying to target. And you can see while there were many, and indeed over 50% in solar businesses, we did canvass a lot in battery storage, wind, and even as important, energy efficiency businesses. And we also were able to seek respondents in electric grid efficiency upgrades and electric hybrid, plug-in, and hydrogen vehicles. Next slide. What we found is that nearly 80% of the respondents indicated that they had experienced a moderate to large negative effect as a result of the COVID-19 pandemic. That's represented in the first bar on this chart as a percent of all responses. Next slide, please. in terms of financial assistance, you can see the light green bar at the beginning of this chart showing that almost 50% received some Paycheck Protection Program assistance. It far outstretched any of the other sources of assistance during this COVID-19 period. Next slide, please. Next slide, please. Thank you. This is a two-panel chart that shows how customer orders had shifted for these clean energy businesses as a result of COVID-19. That's on the left panel. And on the right panel is a summary of their responses to the question regarding the expected change in their revenue or sales over the next 3 months. Let's take a look at the left panel first. As you can see here, 65% of the survey respondents indicated that they had experienced delayed or postponed customer orders. 40%, which is the next bar, the second bar in, indicated that the orders were reduced, while over 20%, the orange bar, indicated that customer orders were outright canceled. On the right panel, you can see here the first orange bar showing that 40% of the survey respondents indicated that they would expect to see a decline in their revenue and or sales over the next 3 months. Just to stand back a minute now from these survey results, you can see that the impacts are quite substantial and that survey respondents think that it's likely to persist at least over the next 3 months. Next slide, please. We asked the survey respondents to name 3 policy solutions, whether they be at the federal, state, or local level, that would be most helpful for recovery and expansion. You can see here that the most responses were really in the area of new tax credits. Secondly, tax credits that could be turned into cash grants were cited by about 35% of the respondents. And then the third highest policy solution really centered on infrastructure investment. And as we know, in looking at different clean energy sectors, that is really critical. Infrastructure build out is quite important for many of the clean energy businesses. The next highest priority was certainly the low interest loans, and that was about 23% of all responses. Next slide, please. We did have one question, and this really surprised a lot of us, where we asked the businesses to tell us what they thought about their position on legislation to combat climate change and promote clean energy. In other words, this is an open-ended question. Any of us who have taken surveys know that that question tends to come toward the end of the survey, and often we get very few responses. We actually received 170 write-in open-ended comments on this question, and we will be soon issuing a blog on our website to talk more about these responses, excuse me. But we did find 90% of those comments supportive of some type of policy to address the climate risks that we face and to promote clean energy technologies. Next slide. And we, I've got three comments here where, you can see one in particular frustrated, we can't keep kicking this can down the road. We need carbon sequestration, clean energy tax credits, penalties for polluting emitters. These are policies that could really make a difference. And, you can also see some support to make sure that, I think as this great Powering Forward webinar series points out, that we've got to expand the job creation and access to the jobs to make it an equitable advance as we expand into this transition for a clean energy economy. Lynn, with that, I'll turn it back over to you, and I look forward to questions and comments. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Ellen, for those very insightful results. And I think a lot of what you've presented resonates with what I've been hearing from businesses. And so I just want to remind everyone that at any point you can send us questions via the chat box, and we're going to go over those questions at the end. And with that, I would like to now, oops, I'm sorry about that, turn it over to Timothy Simon, who is going to, let me get you unmuted, talk a little bit about some of the landscape in California that we are seeing with respect to resilience, as well as some efforts to promote diversification of the energy industry. So Timothy, over to you.
Good morning, and let me thank the Clean Energy Business Network for this invitation to participate in this very balanced and informative discussion. I want to commend Third Way for the data that they provided. It was very helpful to me in my practice, and as I don't know if I want to call myself a thought leader, but clearly a thought contributor in this discussion. TAS Strategies I formed after leaving the California Public Utilities Commission. We are a combined law and consulting firm dealing largely with businesses that deal with utilities. We also represent a number of utilities, and I've been expert witness in certain general rate cases and other matters before various commissions around the country. Next slide. Just briefly, some points on my bio, which I believe is also posted. I served on the California Public Utilities Commission from 2007 through the end of 2012. And during that period of time was the ramp up of what we call the Renewable Portfolio Standard and the efforts of California by way of AB 32, the Global Climate Solutions Act, to bring in a large fleet of renewable energy sources and generation to combat climate change. Prior to being a CPUC commissioner, I served under Governor Schwarzenegger's appointment secretary. And in that process, or in that role, actually appointed a number of the positions in California, which is considered a leader. Questionable today as I look outside my window it is dark at 11:25 in the morning from all the smoke from the nearby wildfires. But be that as it may, California has been considered a leader in this space. And this included the California Air Resources Board, the California Energy Commission, of course, the California Public Utilities Commission, and resource secretaries and other positions that I would recommend to the governor for appointment. I also serve as an adjunct professor in the area of securities regulations, actually, but I taught for a total of 19 years at my alma mater, UC Hastings, and Golden Gate University's School of Law. I did serve on what was the first California Green Jobs Workforce Development Board. And this was a state effort by way of legislation to begin to working largely with the unions to begin to define and direct the policies that would increase what was anticipated to be a growth in demand for green jobs. At that time, the recession had an enormous impact on that, the Great Recession, but I believe policies were laid out that were critical to California's leadership in this space. I believe many of you are familiar with the National Association of Regulatory Utility Commissioners. I served as chair of the Gas Committee and on its board of directors. And as such, I do have a certain affinity to natural gas as part of a clean energy solution, particularly as it's matched with renewable sources to deal with the realities of the intermittency and other challenges that both fuel sources create. And of course, that includes carbon and methane. I served on the National Petroleum Council, which is a national group that advises the Department of Energy Secretary. In this case, I was appointed by both Stephen Chu and Dr. Ernest Moniz. And in terms of some of the discussions we're having regarding COVID, I chair the California Black Chamber of Commerce, and we've had to deal specifically with PPP. We hosted webinars with now Vice Presidential candidate Kamala Harris and Congresswoman Maxine Waters and the Trump administration on how to establish a more equitable distribution of resources resulting from the market failures from the COVID crisis. And clearly that included not only the African-American or Black-owned businesses in California, but other minority businesses as well. And then I serve on the board of directors of the American Association of Blacks in Energy. And we are at the forefront in dealing with many of the equity issues surrounding energy, its generation, distribution, management. And then last but not least, I'm honored to be the co-founder of the National Utility Diversity Council, which has probably worked with many of the associations and entities on this call. Next slide, please. I want to give somewhat of an overview of what I want to talk about. One would be California's clean energy context, and that being what we're faced with in California in terms of resiliency and reliability. And again, that ability or obligation to make it as inclusive as possible as of all communities, and particularly those communities that have historically not been included in the planning or dialogue. And then, I'm very proud that California is a leader in diversity and inclusion under General Order 156. In fact, simultaneously, Facebook Live is featuring the funeral of the Honorable Gwen Moore, and I'll discuss that in one of my slides. Something that I'll discuss here that is not, I don't have a specific slide for brevity, but that's the national clean energy in context from a local or state regulatory standpoint. And one state that I think stands out is the state of Washington and their current Clean Energy Transition Act, where as they move towards net zero, the actual on-the-ground planning is to ensure that it has the most achievable levels of diversity and inclusion. And I want to commend the state of Washington for that forethought and understanding that our efforts to deal with climate change is not an elite or privileged process, that it should really engage those on the ground, on the grassroots level. I also want to commend the state of Maryland that has a yearly hearing very similar to the California General Order 156 en banc hearing. Theirs is a memorandum of understanding where they evaluate how diversity and inclusion, and I'm speaking of now in the supply chain, the procurement areas. Other states that have followed this lead are, of course, Illinois, that has a legislative process to evaluate utility procurement. The great state of Mississippi, under the leadership of NARUC President and Mississippi Commissioner Brandon Presley, has initiated a workforce evaluation of diversity and inclusion, as well as Arkansas, under the leadership of Ted Thomas and Commissioner Kim O'Gwen. And then on the NARUC level, and I believe all of the associations and other entities on this call have had some engagement with the NARUC subcommittee on supplier and workforce diversity, headed by Commissioner Sadzi Oliva of the state of Illinois. And I was one of the proponents of making this subcommittee a permanent subcommittee under the board of directors when I served as a commissioner, as well as on the NARUC board of directors. That is my more detailed discussion of the national energy context. I can probably answer more under Q&A. And then, of course, potential workforce opportunities I hope to touch on as well. Can we move to the next slide, please? One of the concerns that I have in the discussion of climate change and our challenges that we have with a warming planet is that I feel we often do not give ourselves enough credit for what has been accomplished. The United States remains a leader in the reduction of CO2, and California is, of course, a leader in that trend. And I think we sometimes don't hear enough of that as we begin to talk about the efforts of many of the associations and businesses that are on this call. So when we look at California, we can see that as GDP and populations have risen, GDP more prevalent, with California having a $3 trillion gross domestic product. California is the 5th largest economy in the world. The actual greenhouse gas emissions, both aggregate and per capita and per GDP, have dropped considerably. And I think that's a statement about how balanced energy policies and the blend of energy resources do have a positive impact on our efforts to reduce CO2 and also our economies. Next slide, please. This is our greenhouse gas emissions in California pursuant or by virtue of the California Air Resources Board. And I think there are some interesting observations here when we look at opportunities by which we can create more jobs and promote more infrastructure. First and foremost, as we see, is transportation. Transportation contributes to 41% of our CO2 emissions in California. And third way was, I think, very, very descriptive in showing how the move towards alternative energy sources, including electric vehicles, hydrogen fuel cell vehicles, compressed natural gas vehicles that are also designed for certain fleet demands, as well as liquefied natural gas technologies and electric technologies that can be used for large big rig, truck type transport. But this is the area that really needs a lot of focus and attention, which I believe are opportunities regarding infrastructure development, be it by way of EV charging stations or compressors for purposes of compressed natural gas, the pipeline, as well as electrical infrastructure that is needed to address these issues, and again, simultaneously have considerable job creation as a result. And then we look at our industrial sector, and I was encouraged to hear the discussion of carbon sequestration and storage. Now in California, we also have a trading market for carbon and carbon credits. This has created a considerable amount of revenue for our state, revenue that will probably be utilized as we're now facing a deficit in light of COVID and the effects of COVID. An area that is of somewhat considerable contention right now in California is electrification versus balanced energy. And like any marketplace, when you have this type of disruption, there clearly is opportunities. Certain cities have opted to ban the import of natural gas. This is in the distribution system to homes and commercial complexes. This would be green fields primarily. As we can see, this is a combined 12% of the CO2 in California, 7% of that being residential. I believe it's estimated 88% of that 7% being natural gas. But the interesting statistic here to me is that in terms of the import and export of electricity, we have a combined rate of 15%. My point being is that if we're going to look at the ability to really employ infrastructure policies and strategies that are going to properly engage jobs and capital investments, we need to back off from the partisan or almost religious rigor and really look at the data and use that data as an information source for opportunities, and particularly communities that are desperately need economic stimulus. Next slide, please. So in California, we have General Order 156. It was authored in 1988 by the Honorable Glenn Moore. And this created an obligation of the utilities, as well as telecom industries, to provide access to the supply spend to diverse businesses, which included African American businesses, minority, disabled veterans, Native Americans. Recently, LGBTQ has been added to this space. And what this has done is effectively every policy implication that comes from the utilities through the California Public Utilities Commission embraces a diversity and inclusion component. And again, the focus here is supplier diversity. I understand the importance of workforce and workforce jobs, but these companies historically have employed minorities as well as being run and operated by diverse communities. At the time, Utility and Commerce Committee Chair Steve Bradford, which Gwen Moore also chaired this committee, introduced in 2010 expanded legislation that brought General Order 156 to the renewable sector as well. I know we have renewable energy associations here, and clearly the utility and the fossil fuel or hydrocarbon space has had a lead historically, but clearly their areas of diversity are stronger or have better statistical indications than some of the new entrants into the energy space. And now Senator Bradford in 2016 expanded General Order 156 to what we call community choice aggregators, which is a form of municipal energy service, not like a muni, but where energy is aggregated by a local community and run by way of a authorizing tribunal or board, as well as energy service providers and distributed energy resources, contractors, and energy storage systems. So what you'll find in California is that we have segmented the energy markets and created what we consider to be not just socially conscious, but business model obligations to demonstrate their ability to include all communities, not just in the job component, but also in the capital structure and business development. Can we move to the next slide, please? As I mentioned, this woman here is the queen and the author of General Order 156. We lost her too soon on August 19th, 2020. If you've not studied her body of legislation, I encourage you to the extent that you can follow California's lead in this space. She also wrote the legislation that created Lifeline, which provides access to low-income communities to telecom and broadband services. And as we know, in the Internet of Things, this is very now critical in the energy management services space, as well as in the distributed energy space as well. So I just wanted to take a moment, knowing how much she has meant to California. And Gwen was very active in national legislative efforts, working with various minority national legislative groups. So I wanted to just take a moment to imprint her memory and her image on all of you that are listening, because I believe that she provided the blueprint or framework on what we can do in light of COVID, in light of the challenges, which are also opportunities to increase inclusion in this space. Can we move to the next slide, please? So California, as many states that are under a cost of service rate of return type of utility framework, has a resource planning process which establishes the procurement needs for the state. And as we can see today, about 34% of our generation comes from natural gas. Now, we are a state that is facing rolling blackouts, and we're also experiencing planned power shutoffs literally as I speak. And this feeds to the challenge of how do we electrify energy uses or move into a form of electrification to reduce CO2 when we've yet to be able to achieve the necessary reliability. Again, this is a debate, and I think these debates create opportunity, but many would say that California's reduction in natural gas generation, and particularly fast ramp combined cycle peakers, have added to its challenges of meeting demand during high peak periods like heat waves. When we also look at the potential wildfire threat and what it has on our electric overhead infrastructure, it again begs the question, is it better to look at a more balanced policy going forward versus a single source of distributed energy? Next slide, please. And of course, this leads to our famous duck curve here in California. Because of our success in distributed generation and particularly net energy metering, as well as our energy efficiency efforts, which is the #1 loading order of California's Energy Action Plan, we generate a surplus of energy now during the peak periods of the day. I can recall a time when it was the exact opposite. And I do think this creates opportunity in terms of energy export. But as we move into the shoulder peak periods of the evenings, we're finding ourselves to being deficient in domestic resources and largely reliant upon other states. And when those states are also facing their demand challenges, hence we have the challenge that we face today in terms of maintaining reliability in the system. I think this also is an opportunity in terms of the infrastructure that'll be needed, be it battery storage, natural gas storage, and other molten storage and other opportunities to increase infrastructure that can reduce this uncertainty in the marketplace. Next slide, please. So in terms of careers and jobs, I think from my view as a former regulator and chairing the African American Chamber, sitting on a college trustee board, we have to put a greater focus on STEM education, and particularly in diverse communities. I think so often I see the pictures that show people of color installing the solar systems on roofs, and I think those are important when we're talking about IBEW and other strong union and even non-union competitive jobs. But in reality, we have to put a greater focus on domestic education, and particularly education in energy. I think one of the reasons why we have such sometimes heated debates in this area is that so many individuals are not understanding the true policies and how the policies affect energy. And as we say in parlance, are you keeping my beer cold? So there are a number of positions of substance that I think we can begin to focus on in terms of the workforce of the future, particularly with an increasingly aged and retired energy workforce and the opportunities that creates. As we look at our changing energy markets, I think being able to put more study and focus in civil engineering and electrical engineering in areas like resilience and reliability and resource planning is very important. But I've emphasized from an education standpoint, because too often we have these discussions amongst ourselves because we are more than likely policy wonks. When we go to the ground level and the people that vote in or either vote the people in who appoint the people, sometimes those discussions are not necessarily understood to the degree. And in wrapping up, I would say that we need to diversify. And also, by way of looking more at matters like the HB1 visas, put more emphasis on domestic students and opportunities. And this would include historically Black colleges and universities, as well as more outreach and, again, education to high schools, particularly those serving potential diverse labor markets. Next slide, please. That wraps it up for me. I appreciate your attention, and I look forward to Q&A. Thank you.
Wonderful. Thank you so much, Timothy. And I really appreciate how much you wove together the climate issues, the reliability and resilience issues, along with the diversity issues, and really look forward to the discussion. So I would like to now turn it over to Sean Garrison, who is the Director of Congressional Affairs at the Solar Energy Industries Association. And SEIA has been doing quite extensive work under the aegis of its current CEO, Abigail Ross Hopper, to promote diversity in the clean energy workforce. So I'm going to turn it over to Sean to talk a little bit about those initiatives.
All right. Thank you so much. Hope you can hear me. I'd like to thank the Clean Energy Business Network and the Business Council for Sustainable Energy just for allowing me to represent SEIA today, and all my colleagues at SEIA who helped me get all this information compiled. Just very briefly, as a bunch of my colleagues have already hit upon, particularly Third Way, the energy workforce today, the clean energy workforce today is thriving and still pushing forward. You think about the cost of solar and wind over the past 10 to 15 years getting lower and lower. That's helped our industry gain more strength, gain more popularity, and make our industry a little bit more politically palatable. So that's been very good around the growth. And that leads to a strong workforce, a stronger workforce within our industry. As COVID has opened up to a lot of us, the face-to-face interaction with your buyers, your suppliers, your customers has been inhibited upon. And it's showing us that we need to garner quicker and more automated permitting around the things that can help us get towards the 21st century even quicker. So COVID, as many of my colleagues already explained, created a lot of challenges for the clean energy workforce, a lot of gaps. You think about, as my colleague from Third Way pointed out, the necessity around tax credits and tax equity and the tax credits and the cash grants, and then the use of the payroll protection program. That was essential because almost 80% of solar companies are small businesses. So they were able to receive those payroll protection program grants, enable them to continue through these harsh COVID times. So those have been very helpful. And what's also been very helpful, and I alluded to a little bit earlier, is that the solar industry, at least clean energy in and of itself, has been able to garner some additional bipartisan support. Republicans, at least on that side of the aisle, that 10 to 15 years ago, we might have been dealing with some of the third rail issues of clean energy being viable. We're now looked at as good, viable businesses that are part of the American infrastructure and needs for the future. So I think that growth has been very essential for us. So you think about our workforce and diving in just kind of the particular things SEIA is.
Rushed. I tried to pull myself down in how I.
Okay, I think we had a cross there. Right? So you think about our workforce and what we need to do to create a future and a good workforce for a low carbon future and transition opportunities. Congress has been very, very, very embedded in this. It's particularly around the social issues that have been happening over the past few months. So how do we, ensure diverse, equitable, and inclusive workforce? And I'm very proud to work for an organization that has taken these efforts and taken them to the full forefront, both internally and externally. Diversity and inclusion has been a big priority for us since our organization's inception, but particularly since 2017. With solar being a very, very fast-growing industry, as one of my colleagues alluded to a lot of African Americans being pictured installing solar panels. That's true. And it's just not in that community, but across the country in the stratosphere. So we're doing some particular things. We've created a board task force that we have 4 board level areas that we're focused on, that we're compiling information, putting together a strategy, and by year's end, we hope to have some compiled information and things that the solar industry can dig in and lean upon as we deal with environmental justice issues. My colleague referred to supply diversity. That's one of our 4 tenets that we're dealing with. Supply diversity is key. How do you create an industry if you don't have anyone at the inception and birth thereof? So we're dove into that heavily. And SEIA has also put out a diversity best practices guide. If you look at the link on the slide right here with my picture, the link is found there that you can look at this diversity best practices guide that we've been using over the years and continuing to grow upon to figure out where our industry is, where we sit, and where we need to go. The link to the report from last year is on here, and our newer report will be coming out in November. Very briefly, you think about all the things we've talked about today, and essentially what can we do as a nation? What can Congress do around workforce development? We've, as many of you probably followed, the efforts on Capitol Hill, particularly that have been blossoming more over the past few months. Environmental justice is just an issue that is penetrated throughout Capitol Hill. SEIA did some research. We found over 54 bills that include environmental justice issues in there. And there's not just clean energy, but there's water, there's LIHEAP, more money for heating and energy protection for consumers. And then there's just discussions around labor, discussions around the workforce, the clean energy workforce, and the energy workforce in and of itself being more inclusive. And so the election is going to determine a lot of things. I think some of the key things that we've seen this year is the Senate and House, both of their climate committees have submitted reports around what they want to foresee happen in the climate change spectrum. One key thing in the Senate plan is the ITC and PTC possibly going directly to homeowners. They put a provision in there where the investment tax credit and production tax credit, you would give direct payments. They would allow incentives for low-income individuals and communities so they can benefit from some of the economics around clean energy. And then one other bill that's key, and I think has just been a nucleus and platform for what the Congress is going to do around clean energy, is Congressman Bobby Rush from Chicago, my hometown, introduced H.R. 1315, the Blue Collar to Green Collar Jobs Development Act in 2019. So this bill establishes a clean energy workforce training program in DOE and promotes minority workers in the energy sphere. It's $70 million through fiscal year 2025, so it all depends on when it's implemented and when it started. But the key point in here, and the reason that a lot of members in the Congress like this bill, is it starts the pipelines for our schools and community colleges to start getting involved in this clean energy workforce. What economic justice ramifications around it? So I think Mr. Rush's bill, combined with what the Senate's doing, combined with just efforts of being leaders as an industry, I'll just close out by saying that putting things at the forefront of our agendas, whether it's SEIA, whether it's your organization, is what's important. SEIA has decided to say, hey, these issues are of the forefront to us, and outside of the issues that we're fighting for economically, justice issues yield good economics too. And so I'm proud to work for an organization that stands for that. And we have to include those things into our base and argument going into 2021 and years beyond. So I will turn it back over to our moderator and look forward to question and answer.
Thank you so much, Sean. Really appreciate that, and really all of the work that SEIA has been doing in this area. And for our final panelist, before we turn it back over to Lisa for some closing remarks, I would like to now turn to Camille Moore, who we were delighted to, who we were delighted to have as our Jan Shuri Fellow this summer. And she's going to discuss some of the research that she did over the summer on the clean energy workforce and some of the policy initiatives to support workforce development.
To everyone. As Lynn said, I had the honor of working with BCSC this summer as the 2020 Jan Shuri Fellow, and I most recently served on Capitol Hill as an Energy Fellow with the Congressional Black Caucus Foundation. So for this first slide, I know that we've all heard it said that we're fighting multiple pandemics, of which COVID-19 is only the most recent. Over the last few months, there have been calls for more conscious consumption, as well as the sustained global call to end racial inequality. It is for these reasons and many more that I believe it is such an exciting time to be a part of the very essential business of energy. It's also a great time to rejuvenate and to reassess our human capital strategies in such a dynamic industry, to look at those strategies in a way that will make them more equitable and accessible. We all know that even despite the recent turbulence that we've seen in the energy and clean energy business, we are really closing out a profound decade of transformation. 70% overall increase when it comes to utility scale hydro, wind, solar. We've seen a lot of growth since 2010. And overall, wind and solar capacity has quintupled or seen a 5-fold increase over the 2010s. However, people of color remain below the national workforce averages within every part of both sustainable and clean energy. And this is something that we really do need to change. Next slide, please. So the report that I'm going to reference today, I'm going to just give a really high-level overview of the report that I worked on this summer for the BCSC, and it is entitled The Sustainable Energy Workforce. Now, when we talk about the sustainable energy workforce, that is a mix of both traditional and non-traditional sources. That would be energy efficiency, which pulls a lot of its correlations to the construction industry, as well as renewables and natural gas. So the goal of this report was to analyze the competencies needed to build better human capital strategies and to also give recommendations to our members on how to meet federal standards. So here on this slide, you can see some excerpts from the report, as well as a detailed list that we give of the some 60 occupations that we assessed and found to be squarely within the sustainable energy workforce. Next slide, please. So the competencies that we looked at include knowledge, skills, and abilities. And if there's anyone on the call with human resources background, you probably know these as the KSAs. What we did with the information we had from both the Department of Labor and the the Bureau of Labor Statistics, is that we really looked at these three categories and made assessments, or an analysis rather, of what we really found to be a through line between these many different occupations. In the previous slide, you could probably see that along with energy efficiency, renewables, and natural gas, there are also many subsectors that would be included within the sustainable energy workforce. So skills themselves can be a very democratizing force within workforce development because skills along with knowledge and abilities are in no way static attributes. They can be learned, they can be enhanced, and they can be acquired. So here, when it comes to knowledge, STEM, of course, ranked as #1, but there was also a close second and third within the many knowledge competencies that we found, and that would be customer service. We sometimes forget that energy itself, even in its essential nature, is ultimately a service industry, one in which we supply every person with the goods and the products that they need. So customer service actually became a very important attribute, along with personability and administrative know-how. Skills, unsurprisingly, the skills that we found were basic in nature, and that should generally reinforce the general functioning and interpersonal skills that would make one good at any job, but especially in the sustainable workforce, basic skills like critical thinking, active listening would be very important. Abilities I found to be a very interesting category, in that 80% of the abilities that we found to be important were cognitive abilities, not physical ones, not ones in which hand-eye coordination were especially important, but cognitive ones. Problem sensitivity was, I think, a term that I became a lot more familiar with, in that problem sensitivity is defined as being able to tell that something is wrong or is likely to go wrong. It doesn't actually involve solving the problem, only recognizing that there is one. I found that to be very interesting, as that is also an ability that ranked very highly among surgeons, physicians, those who need to be very attentive in the work that they do. Next slide. So we should really just enforce that greening the economy should involve everyone. There should not be a certain group or demographic that is not given access or an equitable approach into such an important industry as clean energy. So one of the final pieces of the report is a detailed resources section where we look at the most recent federal awards and programs across the country that we see as very successful in this workforce development space. It is one that is definitely growing, and one thing that we found is that cooperation is truly key. Both the House and the Senate, as Mr. Garrison had mentioned, passed trillion-dollar packages to address surface transportation, economy-wide climate innovation, also essential worker protection. Included within these frameworks are hundreds of millions of dollars in financial assistance for a variety of different programs, for credentials, for task forces, for training centers, for data collection campaigns, for public-private partnerships. It cannot go without saying that many of these assistance opportunities and grants offer special consideration to those that are in partnership, those that are multifaceted, those that are collaborative and community-based. So partnering with your local minority-serving institution or historically Black college, as a previous presenter on this call talked about, is very, very important. We also see labor management organizations being a really key part, understanding and knowing your local workforce development landscape as well as your workforce board. All of those groups should come together to create the partnerships, the credentials, the degree-seeking opportunities, the data collection campaigns that can help represent the unrepresented. So, and final slide. So it has been such, I think, a great time to be in this space. I really want to thank the BCSC for taking interest in this topic to really drill down into what type of workforce competencies we're really looking for. And I think as we take a closer look, we should be able to see that technical customer service skills as well as STEM backgrounds are important, but there is space and there should be more space made for individuals of all types of different backgrounds to contribute to the greening of our economy. So thank you so much to BCSC, CEBN, and our previous presenters. Thank you.
Fantastic. Thank you so much, Camille. Really very interesting findings, and I think you really have kind of created a toolkit that could help a lot of our member businesses get started. And then finally, to close this discussion before we turn it over to questions, I wanted to turn it back to Lisa, who's going to talk a little bit about some survey work that she's done among the BCSE members and some insights that provides for the path forward on some of these initiatives. So Lisa, back over to you.
Thanks, Lynn. I just want to commend all the speakers. I've learned a tremendous amount already, and I want to get to some questions. So I'm only going to spend a minute. There's a number of slides here, but I'm not going to go through them. This is really kind of a sneak peek following up on the work that SIA did. SIA is one of our founders and board members, and when they launched their diversity and inclusivity initiative, they spoke to our board. And that set off an exploration of how BCSE can play a role. And one of the things that you'll see reflected in this survey that we did this summer of our members on workforce development as well as diversity and inclusivity policies and programs is that sharing information at what the industry is doing is really important role for a broad-based organization like BCSE. So this summer, we surveyed our members. We have, about 55 plus members right now, very diverse companies and associations, large, medium, and, obviously with CEBN, we bring in a small business voice, but very diverse organizations to understand how they're looking at these issues. And, I think the big picture takeaways are that there's a lot of activity in this space, whether it be workforce or diversity and inclusion policies and programs. And an important element, which I think came across very well from the panel speakers, is workforce development as well as diversity and inclusion have overlapping opportunities as well as challenges, but they are distinct as well. So different solutions can be applied and different approaches as you're thinking about these issues. Can you go to the next slide, please? So in our survey, we asked members many questions about these different initiatives. But I think, one of the areas I wanted to highlight, which is echoed in Camille's as well as other presenters' comments, is, what is currently happening as it relates to workforce, and where can the federal government, as well as public-private partnerships and local and state governments play a role. They really come into educational outreach, fostering apprenticeship and training programs, and looking to go that extra step to seek out and support underrepresented groups in the workforce. You can go to the next slide, please. There are many barriers, but again, I think by the conversations like the one we're having today, we can share that amongst industry and stakeholders and government officials to overcome them. Especially at times like COVID or other disruptions, there's limited resources. But I think what has come across to me as I've been talking with our members and learning more about workforce development is whether it be just continuing to build a highly skilled and capable workforce for the future when we look at an industry where there are a lot of retirements, or we look at, SIA did an excellent job by presenting its industry's kind of snapshot of where it sits in terms of workforce and the different segments of our population that currently participate. If we're leaving segments of the population out, we are missing opportunities for innovation and benefit across the board for the business activity as well as communities at a local level. So it's a huge deficit when we do not include significant parts of our citizens in an emerging workforce like the energy sector. So, I could go on with more findings, but I'm going to stop now and just say that this is an opportunity for BCSC and CEBN working with the partners as panelists today, but also others to continue to discuss what our industries are experiencing, what they see are their needs going forward, and hopefully together we can continue to report on our progress. So thank you, Lynn. Back to you.
Thank you so much, Lisa. I really appreciate all of those findings, and I think that they resonate. Some of the anecdotal findings you are hearing from members really are complementary to the broader industry research that Camille reported on. I just want to, before we turn over to questions, make a note since Ellen mentioned earlier the high utilization of the PPP, the Paycheck Protection Program within the clean energy industry. Just wanted to flag that for those of our members who are currently applying for the loan forgiveness, if you are having difficulty navigating this process, one of our members, Weaver, is providing some assistance on this issue. So please do feel free to reach out to them at the contact information here if you need trouble, if you are having any trouble navigating those forgiveness applications. So I just want to turn it over to questions. And as a reminder to all of our participants, if you go to the chat box, you can send questions, and we've received some good questions already. So first, this is actually something that a topic that really crosses across several of the speakers' remarks. But I guess Camille, you indicated in your research that some of the KSA, the knowledge, skills, and attributes that were needed, a lot of these I was struck by how much they were sort of non-specific to the energy industry and really just pointed to the need for more higher education and sort of preparation of students to be thought leaders. And Timothy, you, and actually Sean touched on this as well, you touched upon the need to prepare workers not just to be doing construction type jobs, although those are very important and can get people back to work, but to be more prepared for executive level jobs. So, and you talked about sort of the need for careers and jobs. And so really as an open call to all of our panelists, can you talk a little bit more about what you think is needed in terms of policy support or resources for companies to really help be involved in building an educated workforce in our nation that can perform these jobs that will be needed in the future?
This is Sean. I guess I'll just say that, you get your youth early. You get your firefighters that are serving us now. If you get them when they're young and they're seeing trucks and they're excited. So while that's kind of a silly way to explain it, I think you have to really show, especially our teenage world, all right, that these are viable jobs. I think you think 20, 30 years ago, I don't want to date myself, but high schools had straight apprenticeship programs for automobile mechanics. And how do we ingratiate the clean energy world into that, where a teenager or someone that's starting in the job market can say, you know what, if I get into solar, if I get into wind, I can feed my family viably, I can provide a pension, et cetera, for them, and I can do the things I need to do to survive as an American. And I think that's the premise of it all.
Yeah, I'll echo what Sean said. This is Timothy here, but I believe we also need to give our future workforce the highest degree of optionality. First off, linesmen and pipe fitting jobs are very well paid jobs with benefits, great retirement programs. In fact, in terms of the utility industry, they're one of the few industries left in the private sector that offer combined benefit or benefit-based pensions. So that's something that should be strongly considered, and they're very good salaries. But in terms of that optionality, we have to do a better job of getting the energy industry into the high school, even into the middle and grammar schools, so that our future energy policy makers, our future CEOs, can see the options that they have before them based upon how they direct their studies. And I came out of a liberal arts college. I would also want to emphasize the liberal arts side, because I think Camille did a very good job in talking about the critical thinking skills. So I believe that we should incentivize the clean tech industry as well as the traditional energy infrastructure industry, either by way of tax incentives or other policy benefits, to get into our schools and to begin to explain what this industry involves and the opportunities therefrom. But I also think there's a combined benefit, again, that the more our population understands energy, I believe the more it puts pressure on our state legislators, on Congress. I thought Sean did an excellent job in highlighting that, to do the right thing in terms of the policies that we need to establish better national and state energy action plans. And I just want to add to that we have had an extended period of low interest rates. So infrastructure investments are very ripe today. And it's so true. That kid who's a high school senior right now could potentially be in the workforce 4 more years from now. So we have to start looking forward to how we're going to absorb this workforce into this dynamic field.
If I could just add a couple of comments. Yes to everything that was said. I mean, it's so many things and so many other possibilities. I would say that it was really encouraging to read the Clean Future Act from start to finish, especially the workforce development pieces, because there are so many grant programs that exist within that piece of legislation that not only talk about helping displaced workers, but there's also a specific program that talks about wages for new and existing employees that would help them as they train. So literally as you are onboarding, you can have funding to be able to enter renewable electric generation, energy efficiency, grid modernization. There are so many entry points and so many possibilities within this field that I agree we should not close ourselves off to just the service side, even though that is a very important and well-established side. One thing that was not presented in any of my slides were the statistics in where we do see people of color within the energy industry. And unfortunately, we are overrepresented in a lot of the entry-level positions and not as well represented when it comes to C-suite, management, or even board appointments. So there's a lot to be said about the amount of diversity that we have even now and the changes that we should be making even now to elevate the voices that are already a part of the industry. So thank you.
Terrific. Thank you so much, Camille. And do we have any thoughts? This is another question I would put out to all of our speakers about examples of where we've seen best practices of successful workforce development and diversity issues or initiatives, and examples of failures, and what can we learn from those failures?
Well, I guess I can take it.
I know of,
oh, I'm sorry. Go ahead.
Sorry about that. I was just going to mention one program that I found to be really encouraging, which is ShaleNet. They are an organization, multifaceted organization out of the eastern United States. Basically, a lot of natural gas executives as well as educational institutions created partnerships where they actually had a degree-seeking component. I think programs like that are iterative and have many different places where you can enter. So you can be a student, you could become a student, you could do it part-time. Really being able to metabolize, I think, the information in a way that makes that sort of certification or that sort of credential achievable within a period of time. I think those are great programs. I think within the workforce labor space, there's a lot of interest in creating opportunities that are stackable. So being able to build credentials, to really kind of digest information as you would see fit, I think those are really encouraging opportunities to come across because you allow people to basically enter the market and orient themselves in a way that is most beneficial to themselves.
I want to add to that. This is Ellen from Third Way. The auto industry has really taken up the mantle on a lot of this as we transition to electric vehicles. For example, the last round of the contract negotiations for the UAW with the automakers specifically calls out training for new skilled trades related to the production of electric vehicles. In other words, they want those opportunities for the workforce members today to be trained so that those jobs do not get outsourced. We need to have programs like that across all clean energy industries to make sure that even the existing workforce has that opportunity to go into the clean energy sector when it begins to grow even more rapidly.
Yeah, I wanted to say that the National Society of Black Engineers has a summer program for youth. It's usually carried out at college campuses. I spoke a couple of years at one that was being conducted at San Diego State University or Cal State University, San Diego, where they give the children a summer energy skills, or I'm sorry, engineering skills experience, because it expands the whole technical area. I know they've had sites at some of the Google locations and other workforce places. And again, I think at an early age, opening the eyes of young people to where these opportunities can lead is very critical. Also, as I mentioned, the American Association of Blacks in Energy, which I'm honored to serve on the national board, recently had their Zoom scholarship banquet or gathering or celebration, where I had a chance to firsthand to see a number of our future. And again, I'm taking nothing away from those very important union jobs. That is a critical part of the workforce. And if I had chose to take them, I'd probably be retired right now. Okay. But with that being said, again, that optionality. And I know that there's the Hispanics in energy as well as A2Q, which is the Asian energy groups or affinity groups. And I think all of them are looking at pipeline programs, and most of them need funding. But they're looking at pipeline programs that are designed to, again, create or let children know that the opportunities are there. It's unfortunate that we go to other countries to fill positions that could be filled right here at home. taking nothing against our global partnerships. And I know many of your organizations actually have a global footprint in terms of your asset base and including your human resource or talent asset base. But I do think there needs to be a greater focus on developing our domestic workforce. You know, when I'm probably the oldest one on this panel, when the Russians accomplished Sputnik, guess what I got in my classroom? A slide rule, okay? Because America recognized that there was going to have to be a concerted effort to generate future scientists, future engineers, future mathematicians. And I think we have to have that same emphasis now in the area of energy with our schools.
Terrific. Well, we are over time, and I know some folks are logging off. I wanted to pose just maybe one more question before we let everyone go, because I thought this was an interesting one. So, Timothy, you talked a little bit about the need for transportation industrial sectors in terms of CO2 emissions. I'm just curious if any of our panelists have thoughts on the extent to which our greatest needs for emissions reductions align with the job creation potential in terms of which industries might be evolving in the future and might be the greatest sources of new jobs in our industry.
I think clearly the expansion of alternative fuel infrastructure is an area that's ripe not only for investment, but jobs that are going to be needed to expand our infrastructure, both in terms of central station as well as residential, to make these vehicle alternatives either for business or families more desirable and practical. And I think those are opportunities that are, ripe for ideas. Right now, much of the spaces are dominated, is somewhat monopolistic in terms of those that are installing the infrastructure. I think it's ripe for greater competition in that space as well. And then the realization that it has to be the right fit for the user. Not everyone can work in an electrical vehicle. Not everyone can necessarily work in a compressed natural gas or hydrogen vehicle. So the more infrastructure choices that consumers have, I think the more manufacturing and other opportunities will come with it as well.
Terrific. Well, I think that's a good place to close, and it's a note of optimism. And so I just want to thank again all of our panelists for their very valuable insights on these important issues. Also want to thank our partners at Third Wave for helping us put on today's event. And you can feel free to contact myself or Lisa if you have any follow-up questions. As I noted, we will be circulating the recording and slides, and we look forward to having you join us on our next episode of Powering Forward, where we are hoping to either have a preview or follow-up conversation on the outcome of the November election. So thank you very much, and I hope everyone has a good afternoon.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you so much, Lynn. Fantastic job.